Hey, I'm Catiewahwah, and you're watching The Record Review. Hey! This week on The Record Review, I'm going to be taking a look at Beck's long-awaited 12th album, Morning Phase. So when you get the vinyl of Morning Phase, you can see that Beck has kind of like a real hipster look going on. I always think that Beck is one of those guys who's sort of effortlessly cool. Like, I have him in my head with Spike Jonze and Wes Anderson, probably because they all look quite similar, but they have that thing about them that they just emanate coolness. I think it's sort of impossible for them to look not cool. And so when you buy the vinyl, you also get a beauty shot of Beck looking black and white, even more hipster than the cover with the lyrics on the back. And then of course you get the MP3 download code, and what's really cool about the Morning Phase MP3s is that they're specifically ripped from the vinyl. They're actually called the Vinyl Experience. So it's cool that when you get the vinyl, you get a complete experience that you're not going to be able to get at all unless you get the vinyl. So Morning Phase was released earlier this year, and it was actually Beck's first album release in 6 years. He hadn't released a single album since Modern Guilt in 2008. Although that's not to say that Beck hasn't been busy recording. He's released 3 singles in the interim, and apparently he's been recording about 3 albums worth of unreleased material. So the 13th album is going to be appearing shortly. If you're not familiar with Beck, he really defined himself in the early 90s with his sonic experiments and really innovative sampling. He's really famous for hits like Loser, Devil's Haircut, and one of my personal favorites from the early 2000s, Girl. But Morning Phase is very different from Beck's classic sound. It's pared down, folky, mellow, almost healing. It has a beautiful simplicity. It is definitely influenced by country music, but you can just cut right out all of the religious aspects of country music that you might associate with them. But it does definitely have that country music feel to it. In Morning Phase, Beck exchanges his trademark quirky lyrics for a stripped back emotional minimalism. And in some songs, such as Turn Away, I got definite hints of a Simon and Garfunkel influence, because there's these vocal harmonies going on that just sound so Simon and Garfunkel. I was getting flashbacks to The Graduate the whole time. But Morning Phase isn't completely different to anything that Beck's ever done. He actually described it as a companion piece to his 2002 release, Sea Change, which was also a lot more folky and a lot more pared down. Beck said that he wrote Sea Change after breaking up with his longtime girlfriend, and so it was all full of the trauma of that event. Morning Phase, like Sea Change, is also very emotional, but what I think is really cool about Morning Phase is that it's like the part 2 to Sea Change, which most people don't usually write about in any sort of traumatic or depressing event. So the event doesn't have to necessarily be a breakup, but what it is if you think of any really traumatic event, you get that initial really violent, passionate darkness where it feels like you're being like torn apart. But that's only part of what the sadness is. After that goes, you get a sort of grim, grey emptiness where everything is muted, but you're still not okay, but you're not terribly terrible anymore. So Morning Phase is really about that period afterwards where it's like a grim grey morning, and all of the songcraft, all of the beautiful rising harmonies, everything in this album is really in service to the emotional journey that you go on. And I would describe the album as a journey of recovery. So what I mean by journey of recovery is that Sea Change feels like the part of a traumatic thing where you're just falling off of the cliff and you're just broken and in pieces on the bottom. And Morning Phase is this slow, determined climb back up, which is usually the bit that isn't as exciting, so no one really writes about it, or not as many people write about it. I am not usually a fan of a pun, but I do love the title of Morning Phase, because I think it's like a really clever wordplay rather than just a normal pun. It's morning, morning with you, but it also captures that sort of grim greyness of the morning. I think sometimes when we use metaphors about a new day breaking, and we think that that's always going to be bright sunshine straight away, we forget that actually the sun is brightest at midday, and when you first wake up, unless you wake up at midday, then the sun is probably going to be like quite low in the sky. It's not that light. So it's the morning phase of slowly getting back to your brightest. And then also, of course, it's mourning as in mourning the loss of something. So I actually think that the beauty of that phrasing is awesome. Like, it's not so much a pun, it's more in the class of the Finnegan's Wake ambiguous apostrophe. And although the album is optimistic in how it tells the tale of recovering from something, it's definitely not easy to recover. And you really experience that as you're listening. It takes a long time to get from the beginning of the album chronologically to the end. And it's definitely one of those albums that is chronological. You do have to listen to it from start to finish because there is an emotional journey and kind of a story arc going on as Beck or you or the character, the protagonist of the album, I guess, wakes up at the beginning and just travels all the way through. And you're saying, oh no, it's just songs. It's just songs. Here is proof. Here is proof that Morning Phase is actually a chronological story. So the opening lines: woke up this morning from a long night in the storm. And then the closing lines are, when the morning comes to meet you, fill your eyes with waking light. It's the same metaphor of the morning, and the morning at first is something scary and something that's coming in that's unwanted, whereas by the end the morning becomes something that's healing and that is going to help whoever it is who's singing this to recover. And this idea of gradually learning to embrace the morning and to embrace change is something that's really cool because it's a metaphor that Beck uses throughout the whole album and transforms. The way that he sings about it in the opening song is obviously very different from the way that he sings about it in the closing song, Waking Light. It's very poetic, and this album is definitely one of those that really blurs the line between music and poetry. When you're listening to it after you watch this review, because you should, definitely really pay attention to the words and images that Beck is using, because he really transforms them throughout and he really builds these images. Even though the music is obviously really important in the album, it wouldn't be an album without the music, it really is in service to the lyrics and the arc of the story throughout. So I was trying to think of a way to describe the album that would be like a really zippy one-liner, one-word explanation for it. We all know the words soul-crushing or like soul-destroying, those sort of terms. And this is the opposite. It's sort of soul healing. You really do feel like everything about the album, the music, the melodies, the lyrics themselves, the repetition of various words, it all feeds you and it's all feeding into your soul and kind of building you up again. While the A-side is more sort of buoying you along in this feeling of emptiness, the first track of the B-side, Wave, starts with this really big orchestral start. If you think about it cinematically, it really does feel like the midpoint sort of conflict or crisis, because it's the point where the character or the singer or Beck or whoever we're calling is at the center of this story arc really has to decide whether they're going to let themselves be pulled back into this depression or if they're going to just try and get better. And after that song, you really do start to hear more optimistic tones within the music. So the whole B-side just really feels like you're getting better and better and better. So as I said, it's structured chronologically as a journey. It's either a single morning or multiple mornings. It's quite difficult to tell because even though it's very clearly traveling along a certain timeline, you don't know how long that is. Time sort of loses meaning. And although there definitely are standout tracks like Blue Moon and Waking Light, which work as singles on their own and have been released as singles, they sound so much better within the actual arc of the album because you can hear their context and you can hear how he kind of gets to that point and you get the payoff of like hearing that song after hearing the rest. I guess it's like sometimes there's a really cool scene in a film and it works on its own pretty well and it's quite entertaining on its own, but it's so much better when you watch it within the whole film and you build up to it and you understand why it's there and then you get to see what happens afterwards and you get the payoff of it. So it is a really lovely journey of recovery, as I've said, and I cannot stress enough how nice it is to see an artist taking on this part of like sadness. It's very popular for people to create things based on very traumatic events and talk about that darkest time. And it is important to express that darkest time that people experience, but everyone does experience a bit afterwards. I feel like everyone has experienced this and no one really talks about part 2, except this album. It's really nice to see Beck embracing that part of the emotional journey, and I think personally that one of the highest purposes of art is to take an individual circumstance of suffering and be able to transform it into like a universal acknowledgement that we all suffer. Because those sorts of experiences, those sort of depressions and just real sadness can be so isolating because they are quite individualized. To be able to share someone else's experience makes you realize that everyone does experience this. And not just that, but Beck is really taking a bad experience of his own and showing how it got better. Fill your eyes with waking light. I have to give Beck's Morning Phase 5 stars. I think that this album is absolutely stunning. It's stunning as an album, and I think that it's probably one of the best releases of 2014. I don't know if I'm speaking too soon, but it's so good. I would also recommend it as a gift for anyone you know who maybe has gone through a bit of a tough time, or more if they've gone through a tough time and then they've been quiet for a little while and you don't think they're better yet, but they just seem to have withdrawn a bit. It might be just what they need, and it's something to pull them back up. And of course, it wouldn't be the record review if I wasn't about to tell you whether you should get it on vinyl. Yes. Even Beck says that you should get it on vinyl, okay? He hasn't released any music videos for this album yet at all, except for a video of the vinyl being cut. So that's not an endorsement from the person who made it saying that this is a really important one to get on vinyl. I don't know what is. But if you still don't want to get the vinyl, for whatever reason, maybe you don't have a record player, maybe you just don't really want to spend that much on Beck, and then the only thing I would really advise is do listen to it chronologically. The tracks will sound good on their own, but they will sound so much better if you actually get the full story arc. The story that I've been telling you won't make sense if you listen to it out of order. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to my channel and also leave a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts on Beck and if you have any requests for any future reviews. Next week I'll be reviewing Lord's debut album, Pure Heroine, but until then, bye! This week on the record review, it's a bit of a throwback Thursday. I'm going to be taking a look at American Beauty by the Grateful Dead.